speakers. Now, today you're in for a treat. So many of you all have talked about wanting to be landlords, wanting to be real estate investors, because we all know that's a great way in order to build your wealth, but also to build your income. So today we have Daa'iyah Cooper. She is a resident of Baltimore, Maryland. She's an academic physician that specializes in emergency medicine. She is a graduate of Howard University College of Medicine. From there, she completed a combined residency in emergency medicine and internal medicine at East Carolina University, then subsequently fellowship in clinical simulation at Maimonides. Child, I'm saying it all wrong. Currently, she is the director of simulation at the University of Maryland School of Medicine Department of Emergency Medicine. When she's not treating patients and running the clinical simulations with her learners, she's an active real estate investor. And what I think is so great about this is so many people are like, I got a full-time job. Can I do this on the side? Obviously, yes. She's a passion for sharing the benefits of real estate ownership and investing with an emphasis in empowering Black women. That's what we're here for. She is the owner of Capital Dynasty, a wealth building brand with a focus on real estate investing and consulting. Through Capital Dynasty, she is able to help clients clarify real estate investing goals, analyze deeds, and optically utilize and pitch creative financial strategies. She is also the founder of Sister Docs in Real Estate, or REI, Facebook community with over 600 Black female doctor real estate investors. Dr. Cooper's real estate focus areas include creative financing, short term rentals, and long term buy and hold investing. So I am so happy that all of y'all are here today. We have talked a ton about, do you want to get started? When do you want to get started? People like, I ain't got enough money to put down for some real estate. So Daa'iyah, tell us, how can we get started? How do
Yeah.
we jump into this realm?
Well, first, I just want to thank you so much for having me on your platform. I've been following your platform for a while in your Facebook group. If you guys are not in the group, please join it and definitely follow this YouTube page because it's an amazing platform. I mean, I've learned so much. So I just want to say thank you for inviting me to speak here with you. So I think one of the best ways to get started is just to keep it simple and start with your own property, which is how I got started. So I got started with buying my own personal home. And with buying your own personal home, there's so many first-time home buyer grants. There's so many options out there for low down payment loans, and sometimes it's even zero down payment loans. And then once you get into your first property, I feel like a lot of times people want their first property to be more of a dream home, but I think it's great to buy your first property as a starter home, and then subsequently when you move out, you have your first rental property without having to go through a lot of some of the hoops with traditional real estate investing purchasing.
And I think that's a great thing. So when you talk about like your first home, people are like, is that the big dream home? I think that's always, yeah. I've been a first time home buyer and I know, knowing what I know now, I was unrealistic with my goals, with my thoughts, with what I wanted. What should that first home look like?
Yeah, so I think with your first home, again, we get excited. We want to have our piece of the American dream, and we want to, have that home with the picket fence and the pool in the backyard, and triple car garage and all these things. But I think it's perfectly fine if your first home is a condo, if your first home is a townhome or townhouse. It can be connected, on one side, both sides, I think, or 2 or 3 bedroom starter home, I think is good for a first home. Now, hey, if you got it like that, if you want to start bigger, go for it. But I just think it's good to start, with the realistic goals of, a starter home and then moving forward from there.
And so once you get started there, you're using hopefully some of these grants, some of these programs out there. We'll probably have to put together a whole list because every time I look around, there are places that'll actually buy out your lease. So if you're on the fence, this might be a great time to look, especially with the market changing. And so once you get that first one, then what is that kind of step 2? So where do we go from there?
Yeah. So with your first home, again, like I said, then, ultimately hopefully you purchased it in the right way. You've talked to someone who's a real estate professional or consultant, someone like me, and you purchase it in the right way where you have a little equity in that home. And so then you have an option. If you want, you can pull some of the equity out to go and buy your next property, which could be your next personal home, and then you can leave that first home as your rental property. Or if already starting off with your rental property, you can do something a little bit creative, like such as house hacking, and that actually allows you to get multiple units with a property that you actually live in. And again, you can still use a lot of those low, no down payment loans and grants to purchase a multi-unit property. So there's different ways to do it, but I recommend starting one with your first home. Even if you feel uncomfortable like doing that, if you don't, you just decide, I just want to jump right in. Before I bought my first investment property in this city where I have most of my investments, I actually was renting for the first couple investment properties that I bought in the city that I'm in now. So there's multiple options. There's a lot of flexibility.
And so definitely with people saying, maybe I might not have any equity. So if you have that first property, you don't quite have enough in order to pull out, what would be some of the alternatives? So you're in your first home, you're like, okay, maybe I'll move out and move somebody in, or maybe I'll try house hacking. But if you're saying, okay, don't have a whole bunch of equity, they've just bought the house at the peak of the market. So if you bought within the last year or so, you're probably right at the peak and you may not have a substantial amount of equity. What are some of the tips or ways that people can actually look at to see some different alternative type financing? So not going to the bank and saying, hey, give me a home loan, but what else is out there?
That. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because that's actually like my passion and my niche is creative, like financing, getting creative, not having to go, to a bank and deal with, and no offense to any lenders who may be listening to the call, deal with a lender or underwriter, and have to, like show and prove, like, this is my income, this is my credit worthiness. And don't get me wrong, please have income, please have credit worthiness. But I just, want to reiterate that there's options out there. So one of the things that you can do is go directly into the bread and butter of real estate financing or investor financing, which we call hard money. And so for those out there who have never heard of hard money, it's actually a type of a loan. So they call it a hard money loan, where actually you are purchasing a property without actually having to show your own credit worthiness, your own income. You are qualifying for that loan based off the property itself and how much income that property can bring in. So you don't have to, again, worry about, oh my gosh, well, I have these student loans and now my credit's a little bit low. This is really interfering with investment property. You actually can go to one of these types of lenders, and the loan is actually based off of the actual property, the property itself, and how much income it can bring in. So that's one type. So that's one way. Now, I will say with hard money loans, typically, especially if you are an early investor, they will want a significant amount of money down. So, with that option, the pro is that you don't have to worry about, okay, my credit is not so great right now. You don't have to worry about that. But you would have to typically, especially if you're a beginner, have a little bit of your own money in the game, usually around 20%. But that leads me to the other option, or one of the other options, and that's one that's using private money, or two, joint venturing with someone who has a little bit more experience than you. Okay, so maybe you are a go-getter, you're like, I'm ready to get into real estate investing, and you have the ability to do a lot of the work when it comes to handling all the calls with the hard money lender, dealing with the title company if you're in a title company state, or the title attorney, whoever's like going to be closing that deal, maybe the investor that you're going to work with, that you're going to do a joint venture with, maybe they're quite busy, they're running their real estate franchise, or their real estate portfolio, but they actually have funds. So maybe you can actually have them put up some of the funds along with your funds, but you put in most of the work. So that's a way that you can joint venture with someone and get into real estate investing without having to put a huge amount down. And you don't have to worry about running your own personal credit. Or let me be clear, you don't have to worry about having to qualify with your credit worthiness. Now, you may have to personally guarantee for a loan, but it will not show up on your personal credit with hard money loans. The other option is to use pure private money, not joint venture with someone, so you don't have to share partial ownership of that property with someone. But you can actually just look in your circle. Auntie, Auntie Ann, Auntie, Chris, or, cousin Jeff, or, one of my classmates from, graduate school. There's people out there. You guys on on this webinar, you guys have some money. Some of you have some money sitting in the bank. You just don't know what to do with it. And there's a lot of people who actually will say, hey, well, I can let you borrow this amount of money. And, you go and put that money into purchasing the deal. You work with someone like me or another real estate professional who can help you, where you're purchasing that property below market value. And so that leaves extra money in the deal that you can pull back out in what we call a refinance, and you can pay that private lender back. So that's another option.
See, that's a really good thought in terms of this joint venture. Now, how are you finding these people? You're just walking up to some rich people and saying, hey, let's do this
So,
thing.
and that's where we often go wrong, because it's not really, people don't have to be rich to be a private investor, right? So I'm actually working on a deal right now. And so sometimes, let me just say this. One, if you are discussing what your goals are and you're not shy and you're sharing with people what you want to do, people will actually volunteer sometimes. Well, they'll say, well, hey, that sounds cool. Well, let me know if this is ever something you actually, put in place, because I have money sitting in my account. At best, with the stock market, I'm going to get 6-7%. In my savings account, I'm going to get less than 1%, probably less than that with inflation, probably going to get negative growth. So I would be happy to give it to you for a higher interest rate. But usually these are not people that are just rich people. If you know rich, wealthy people, so be it. But it's your everyday, your classmate, maybe, a social group member, church member, someone that you know well enough to feel comfortable asking. But a lot of times, if you're just out and about being open, sharing what you're doing, people actually will come to you.
I think that's a really good point too. But in terms of, as you're partnering, how do you do that? So is it you find an attorney? Is there a realtor? How do you make this handshake pretty
Yeah,
efficient?
so you definitely want to have attorney involved, at least to draft a promissory note. And it doesn't have to be anything super fancy, but you definitely want to do this by the book. You don't just want to necessarily take someone's money without actually saying, here, I'm going to show and prove that you have an interest in this property because of how much money that you lend it to me. And this is a promissory note to say I would pay it back over these specific amount of terms. So yeah, you would just, you could meet with an attorney. You can have somebody just to draft up something for you. And then that's something that you can sign that agreement along with your lender, and keep that on file until you refinance out. And this is not a long-term thing. And it sounds complicated with the steps, but it's actually a process that could take less than a year, maybe less than 9 months, sometimes 6 months, depending on how fast you close on the property and the refinance.
So when you say less than a year, less than 6 months, we're talking the time that you refinance out of this kind of agreement with this joint venture, or the lady from church, or your
Yeah.
homegirl who got some extra funds, that kind of thing.
And the key here with this example that I'm giving you all is making sure that you are working with a professional, whether it's a real estate consultant, a wholesaler, a real estate agent that knows how to help you find properties that are under market value. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make is buying at the top of the market or buying at the top of our budget. And that's where you run into the problem of not leaving any room in the deal. to pull money out later, which is, what I'm referring to in the example of the refinance out. That is, what I mean by pulling money out later in order to, one, use it for a down payment for a separate property, maybe in the future, or pulling it out to pay back an investor or a
Now you
lender.
mentioned, buying some of these uglier, less desirable. I always say when I first started my first house and I'm going to look at places, I'm like, no, it's nasty. It might have bugs. Got some holes in the wall, some basic things like that. So what are things to look for when you're looking for a property that's going to have that potential? And you gotta give yourself the pep talk and say, okay,
Oh,
we're
that's a
going to
great
ignore the
question.
busted window.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question.
That
So
kind of
some of the things to look for, one is you want to find the worst property on the best block. That's, one key, the worst property on the best block. So maybe it's a really, chill neighborhood, a lot of homeowners in the neighborhood. But maybe it's just, one person who's lived there for generations. Maybe it's an elderly person, they don't have a lot of help. Maybe they didn't have any children, or they don't have any heirs or helpers to help them out with it, and the property's kind of running down. They didn't keep up with the maintenance, grass has grown up. That may be a perfect property for you to purchase under market value. Another thing to look for is that if you are in an area where there's development going on, and pretty much any major city right now in this country, there's development going on. And so you want to kind of get on the edge of that development. You want to get kind of in an area where you're not right in the thick of, a completely rundown area that's being developed, but you're maybe, a couple of blocks away. I think, again, it would be unwise to buy in the the already pretty beautiful developed area with all the beautiful properties, because those are now going to be at the top of the market. But if you get a few blocks away or a neighborhood away from that area that's run down, that's being developed, that's a perfect place to purchase as well. So that's how you look for kind of these more what we call distressed properties when you're looking, whether you're looking on market with a realtor or whether you're looking off market with a wholesaler or real estate consultant, or if you're just chatting it up with people in your local real estate group. You want to be looking for properties kind of on that fringe area of development, and that's where you're going to get the most for your money. So that's a really good question. That's one way you would those are some of the things that you would look for, and ways that you can find it. Like I mentioned, other than using your realtor, you can find what we call wholesalers, who are actually people who get properties under contract. They don't necessarily buy them, but they tie them up legally with a contract, and then they have the option to sell those properties to you, an end buyer, and they are getting those properties under contract from those sellers at a significant amount under market. So that's an option as well. And you'll find these wholesalers, usually there are Facebook groups in your area. You can just search on Facebook and put in your city, and put in wholesaler, or put in your state and wholesaler, or your region and wholesaler. And then usually there's a lot of Facebook groups out there that have them, and they'll be posting properties every day for sale. Another option is to join your local real estate investor association groups, REIA, Real Estate Investor Association. And those REIA groups will have investors there who, one, they'll share information, teach you things about, what it's like to be a new investor, give you tips. And a lot of times there'll be people there selling properties as well. So those are properties to look for, and those are places where you can find those properties.
Now, that's a great thing when we're talking about these wholesalers, because I don't know about you all, but definitely it's more likely that you've heard of go find a realtor, less
Mhm.
likely that you've heard let's go find a wholesaler.
Mhm.
Now, are you going to find one wholesaler the same way you find one realtor and you work with them? Or are you working with multiple wholesalers out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, that's a good question. I work with multiple, but there's a couple in my area who just know the type of properties I like. So actually, the last few properties I've purchased, actually several of them, I haven't even had to like go look for them. They just come to my inbox. They'll say, "Oh, hey, this is a creative deal. It's a seller financing deal or subject to deal," which is a good segue to talk about those types of creative financing, but they know the type of properties I like, and so they will just send them right over to me. But yeah, I think it's smart just to have several wholesalers compared to like typically when you have a realtor, you have one and you stick with them and you have an agreement with them that you will work exclusively with them for a particular amount of time. With wholesalers, it's not quite the same thing. And my opinion, it's good to, join these groups or these Facebook groups where these wholesalers are posting the deals that they have under contract so that you can have a variety of options in your area.
And Quinn says, never hurt to find a wholesaler, which I think is probably a whole bunch of people here watching today. And I think that's a good thing just in terms of, we're going on Facebook and we understand, Facebook is full of legitimate folks and a whole bunch of scammers. How do we know,
Absolutely.
which one, are we talking to the right person? Are we talking to somebody who's out there just going to waste our time? Like, how do we know how to vet these people?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one, you want to make sure that it's as much as possible. Again, you look for wholesalers that actually, the ones that post frequently in these groups, the more frequent ones are usually people who have a robust amount of properties they've gotten under contract. When you have when you have some that are just posting here or there, they may not be, very popular wholesalers in the area. And so those are the ones that you definitely would want to be kind of wary of and do a little bit more due diligence. One, you want to make sure you ask them for the contract. Because a lot of times what will happen is that when a wholesaler goes and gets a property, they'll go talk to a seller and say, hey, seller, I see that your house looks a little run down, or I see that I passed by this property and I've looked on my database. There's special databases out there that they use. And I see that you actually don't even live in the state anymore. So you don't live there. No one's in that property. Are you kind of tired of dealing with it? Would you mind selling it? I can actually get you a good, amount of money for it, even though it needs work. And so they'll go and sign a contract with that seller for a specific amount. What you can do as a potential end buyer of that property, that contract, is you can ask that wholesaler, hey, can I see the assignment contract and make sure that they really do have this property under contract? Because sometimes what happens is with one of the common scams, they call it daisy chaining, is people will post these deals, wholesalers will post these deals, and someone else who doesn't even have that property under contract will go and repost that deal somewhere else and just put maybe $5,000 more onto the purchase price. Um, and then, so they actually didn't go and do the work. They didn't get the property under contract, but then they will create a new contract with that same address that person posted, and actually go and try to be another middleman in the deal. So one way to kind of counteract that is to say, I want to see that original assignment contract that you had with the seller, just to make sure that you and your entity, are the ones who originally got the property under contract. So that's one way. And then you want to make sure you're always closing with a title company or a title attorney, and you're not giving the wholesaler any money. You're sending the monies directly to the title company. Do not send the wholesaler any money. Just like with a realtor, you wouldn't be sending them money directly. You would be sending money directly to the closing agent.
And someone posted, wholesalers are calling me every month asking to purchase my home. I 100%, I'm there too. I'm answering my phone and they're like, actually, would you? No. So
Yeah.
we definitely know. And would that be a reputable person? So if someone's calling you and saying, I want to buy your house, you can say, actually, do
Yeah.
you have anything for
So
sale?
the way you need to view that now that you're on this webinar and you're listening to us chat is change your viewpoint on that, because I used to have a different viewpoint when they would start calling me when I started buying more and more properties. Now I turn it around and say, hey, well, one, I don't sell my properties. I'm a buy and hold investor. It's all about wealth for me, long-term wealth. But do you have something for sale? Do you have something else for sale? I'm not selling mine. And then that's a way that you can now, get on their list, because wholesalers usually keep lists. They'll keep your name, your email, like I mentioned earlier. Things have just come to my inbox basket, and that's how I found some of my properties. And now you have a potential, kind of stream of properties So that's one way to look at it. So don't let it annoy you too much. Just turn it into a potential, deal for you.
I know a few people are like, "Oh my God, they are worse." And and I am definitely guilty of being short and hanging up and all those kind of things. And I guess it is where you could say, actually, I'm not selling, but if you have something else,
Yeah.
that's a great thing. And so
And
a few
the real
people
ones,
think,
the real ones will be like, well, actually, the ones who are, maybe new or maybe a little scammy will, they won't have anything to say. They won't email you anything. You'll give them your email, and I, have email specifically for that. So I won't get spammed with a whole bunch of stuff in my real email. But the ones who are new or who don't really have any properties under contract, they won't send you anything. And when you say, well, hey, here's my email address, here's my number, what else do you have under contract? Just send it over to me, because I actually may be interested in purchasing, something else, even though I'm not selling. The real ones will be like, well, actually, as soon as we get off the phone, I'll send this right over to you. Thanks for your contact information. And so that's one way to weed people out too.
and someone said, so should they respond to the text messages? I know they're sending like real mail, and I'm like, who's sending me real
mail, text messages? So yeah, I mean, because there's no harm in it. Like I said, there's going to be some that aren't serious, or maybe who are just getting started and they don't really follow through. But there's going to be some where there's probably some good deals out there. And so I think it's always good to respond and say, no, I'm not selling, but I'm an investor. If you have something, let me know. This is my number. You can reach me.
And this is a really good question. It says, is there a way to look up, or so is there like a website or a database for wholesalers?
Yep. So one common database that wholesalers use, probably the most popular one, is propstream.com. And you as an investor can use that as well, because again, you should be finding properties the same way that wholesalers do, because wholesalers are the good ones, are the professionals. They're experts at finding off-market, undervalued properties. And so if you start learning how they do their job, even if you're not going to, what they do is they ultimately sell that property to someone else. They're not buying it themselves. But if you learn their strategies and you look for properties the same way they do, then you too can find undervalued properties. And instead of, obviously wholesaling them to somebody else, you can keep them yourself. So yeah, propstream.com is one of those databases that they use to search for properties.
So that's a good one. Definitely mark that one down. But definitely, I think that's a great thing. And one tip that you mentioned, I'll repeat it. You said you have an email address just for this. I don't know how many email addresses y'all got. I probably got like 6, 7, 8. Like, okay, give these people this one and these people that one. So it's a great time to just, pop open a whole nother email address and try it out and kind of see what they send you.
Yeah, because they won't hurt.
Yeah, I mean,
as long as you're not sending anybody any money, as long as you're not sending one any money, it won't hurt. And it's just a way to get out there, take chances. But yeah, I think really the gem there, and just everything that, the questions that were asked by your audience, is getting an understanding of how to find properties off market. I think I cannot really kind of reiterate that enough. Off market gives you so much more flexibility when it comes to price. Now, obviously, you may have to put in a little bit more work when it comes to, like, the condition of the property, but you're not going to find as many undervalued properties on market on the MLS, the multiple listing service, or Bright as it's called now, with a realtor than you would off market with just driving around or talking to wholesalers or talking to community members. And you don't just have to use wholesalers. Like I said, talking to community members, letting people in your church know, letting your coworkers know, hey, I'm an investor. If you know of anybody who's selling property, someone just passed away, their family doesn't want it anymore, which they should keep it. But if they don't, if you're putting the word out there, people will bring you those deals.
Now, this is a question. One, they said, please repeat the address. So the address was PROP stream. So that's the address. And this one actually was a really good one. And this is a good question. And you didn't touch on it, but it says, how long did it take you to start up with your first property? Is it realistic to believe that this is something they can do within a year? Let
Absolutely.
us know a little bit, because I think this is just a really good kind of thought or number in
Mhm.
terms of from the time that you kind of did your first in Baltimore to where
Mhm.
you are now and what that number looks like. I think that's a good illustration of like
Yeah.
what's
Just to give a little backstory, like I mentioned, my first rental property was a personal home. It was my first home that I purchased in 2011. And when I moved away from that, that was in North Carolina. When I moved away to go to more of my training, I was like, well, hey, I want to sell this property. But it wasn't a seller's market. It wasn't the market that we're in now. And so I would have had to, come to the closing table with some money, or take a loss. And I don't take losses. So I said, well, I guess I'll be renting it. So that was more of an accidental thing. So I became an accidental landlord. So that's why I want to just clarify why I keep referring to Baltimore, because it wasn't until I moved to Baltimore when I became an intentional landlord. So although I've been a landlord for years before I moved here, it was more of an accident, wasn't planned. But it was here where I made an educated decision that, hey, I want to learn how to get more streams of income. I need more assets. And I decided, is it going to be stocks? What is it going to be? And I decided real estate was going to be my thing. So when I made that decision, one, I invested in education, to learn literally how to buy properties, particularly in this area, and just how to buy properties in general as an investor. um, so my process may have been a little bit quicker, but I think I probably went under contract on the property, went searching, letting people know I was interested. It came to me by word of mouth, and I probably went under contract at the end of, I think that was back in 2017, 2018, and then the beginning of the following year, January, is when I closed. And that property only needed 8 grand worth of work, worth of renovations. And so that probably was a three month process. And again, like I said, you know, maybe cheating a little bit because I did, invest in education. But that was with education, that was 3 months. So, for you, it's definitely doable within a year,
and then how
particularly.
many homes or doors do you have today?
So right now, because some of them are single, some of them are duplexes, like multis. I have 8 units that I own by myself. I'm a partial investor in a couple other deals with other people. So I helped to buy a block here in Baltimore. So we bought the block. um, uh, I did that with another investor here, and it's a handful of us together that came together to do that. Um, and then I have some land back home in Georgia. So yeah, so a mixture of different things.
So I think that's big to note, because Quinny talked about, can you do this within a year? And within just a few years, you went from one to double digits. That's
Yeah.
significant. But it also just shows what is available. And you talked about a number of these different ways, and we talked about the hard money lending and the wholesalers and so forth. Someone else also said, would you recommend tax liens as a real estate investing alternative?
Yeah. So I think all the options that are out there are viable options, whether it's tax liens, whether it's using wholesalers, even realtors. Don't get me wrong. Nothing wrong with using a realtor. It's just that the options are probably going to be a little limited. But tax liens, foreclosures, sheriff's auctions, just property auctions in general. I think those are all viable options. The main negative with tax liens, however, is that the one sometimes people have like an ethical dilemma, like buying a property that belongs to somebody that they couldn't pay their bill. I can understand both sides of it. But ultimately somebody's going to buy it, so whether it's you, a good person, whether it's someone shisty, so ultimately the people who have an ethical dilemma with it, I think there's multiple ways to look at it. So that's one viewpoint. The other potential con with tax liens is that these people have the ability to redeem their tax lien. So they have the ability to go and pay the money that they were short on, the reason why it went to tax sale in the first place. And so you can make the money on the interest that they have to pay, but you may be investing in tax liens and may never even get a property. And then if for some reason they don't pay and you actually can go and get that property, now you can foreclose on them. You have to go through the foreclosure process. So it's a longer process. So that's the only potential con that I would bring up.
Yeah, definitely have heard some stories in the time period and so forth that goes into that. But there's a number of people who do it and they're
Yeah.
successful in it.
Yeah.
And actually, if you take a look back, I can't remember what date, but go into the YouTube channel and go under real estate. Someone actually goes through the process for purchasing some of these tax liens. And so we had a speaker not too long ago. So definitely go back, check that one out. You could get some information on that one.
Yeah, I think I saw that. That was good. So you guys should definitely check that out. So there's definitely options. Some of my favorite ways to purchase properties, though, like my one favorite way, I should say, is to do seller financing, though. And so seller financing is a creative way to finance properties where you literally just go directly to the seller and say, seller, you're going to be my bank. You're the bank, and I'm going to pay you every month for this property until I pay it off or until we reach the end of our term agreement. So I don't know if your audience out there, anybody's out there heard of seller financing, but it's a great way to purchase properties. I've purchased probably at least 3 or 4 with seller financing. And, it's just so much easier than going to a bank and again, having to, let me show you all my pay stubs. And I'm a physician, so I have nothing, like it's not like I'm not going to qualify, but it's just the whole idea of, going through that process, like the audacity of asking me, but yeah, so instead of, going through the process of, it's traditionally, a white male dominated industry with mortgage lending, I just say, I'm going to do this on my own terms, and I'll go directly to the seller and say, hey, do you need a big lump sum of money? And a lot of times sellers don't. Some of these sellers are investors themselves, and they're just tired of dealing, with their tenant. They didn't have a real estate consultant like me that they work with, so they got a bad tenant, or they bought the property in the wrong way, and they just they like getting the monthly income when they were getting it, but they don't like managing the property, and they're like, well, hey, I don't need a big lump sum of money. I'm happy if I can just take maybe a third of what I'm getting from my tenant and still get monthly income, and just get rid of this property, not have to have it on my hands anymore. And so that's where you come in. So you can pay them a monthly income, i.e. the mortgage. And sometimes you can even buy it without even having to put down a down payment. And then you pay that until you pay off. So there's so many terms that are out there that you can use. It's quite flexible. You can do it with no down payment. You can do it with no interest. You can do it with no down payment plus interest. You can do it with no interest, but a small down payment. There's so many options out there. And sometimes people will seller finance property to you for a long term, for 20, 30 years. And some of them will say, hey, yeah, well, I'll finance it for you. You can pay me, but in 3 years, I need you to go ahead and pay the loan off. And then at that time, you can sell the property or refinance it and just pay them off. But just to get into the deal, you didn't have to go to a bank.
Now, I'm quite sure a number of people, because someone said, I love that you're doing it on your own terms. And I'm quite sure if anyone has ever done a mortgage and they're like, send me your bank statement. Wait a minute. It looks like you wrote a check for $5,000.
Right.
What was that for? If you've gone through the process, you might say, my credit good, my money right, but still.
Right.
So
right.
tell us more about what these terms look like. How does that actually make sense? Do you go, you walk up to somebody, knock on their door and say, listen, I'm trying to buy this.
Yeah.
Can you finance it? What does that look like?
For me, it's my go-to for every time I come across a property. Like, I have the audacity to ask. One tip number 2, have the audacity to ask. So tip number 1 was find properties off market. Tip number 2 is have the audacity to ask. so no matter what potential deal I come across, whether it's with a realtor, whether it's with a wholesaler, whether it's, a friend of someone that I bought a property from before, every single time I'm going to ask them, well, would you consider, me paying you directly for the property, instead of just selling it completely outright? And the way that you spend that, one way that you spend it is tell them the potential benefit would be, one, if they're actually selling that property outright, unless it was like their personal home, there's a few different kind of tax criteria, but for the most part, if they're selling that property, they're going to it's going to be a capital gain, right? And so you guys, you've been following your wealth guidance, you probably know what a capital gain is from a tax standpoint. When you sell on the tax term is installment sale, which is what seller financing is, when they are selling and they're not actually getting that full gain at one time, that's actually a benefit to them, right? Because they're going to be taxed less. So that's one way that you can sell it. Say, hey, seller, have you considered maybe instead of doing this as a full cash deal where you just sell the property in one fell swoop, have you considered just taking monthly payments on it? And then you would tell them that potential benefit. So I ask every single time, whether it's a wholesaler, and I see a property that I'm interested in, I would say, hey, Mr. Wholesaler, can you talk to the seller and see if they would be open to selling this on terms? So there's different terminology: selling on terms, owner financing, seller financing, installment sale. Usually if you're talking to a realtor, they're going to understand the term installment sale. If you're talking to a wholesaler, they're going to understand the term owner financing, seller financing. If you're talking directly to the seller, you're going to use the terminology, will you take monthly payments? Does that make sense?
I think that's a really good thought process, because a lot of people, someone said that they're in Baltimore County, she's approved for a HELOC
Hey,
and
connect
wants
with
to use
me.
some of that money. We have a couple people in Baltimore, and that actually, so I'm gonna go and come back. But if they're in Baltimore and they're like, "Girl, help me,"
Yeah.
how would they help? How would you help them?
My website, thecapitaldynasty.com, if you go to resources tab, the resources tab, it allows you to book a free discovery call. If you want a longer call, like a full hour call where we actually go through a specific strategy and a specific deal, and I help you analyze the deal and run the numbers and how to help you pitch it to the seller, those are not free. But I will give your audience a discount if they put in the comments that they're coming from you. But yeah, so you would go to the resources tab on thecapitaldynasty.com, and it has a link there to book.
And so that's big. So all the people that were like, I'm in Baltimore County, especially, she's an expert over there in Baltimore County, hit her up, get you free, and then get your discount.
Yes.
But even back to the seller financing, I think one, we've already talked about wholesalers and people are like, what in the heck? I never even thought about that. And so now the seller financing, once again, if you're doing seller financing, do you need a realtor? Do you need an attorney? Like you just,
Good question. Yeah.
sign a napkin in their kitchen. Like what, what does that look
Yeah,
like?
so you definitely, again, somebody like me who's been doing this for a while, I'll just have purchase and sell agreements just saved in my computer, so I can send them over. Or if I'm dealing with a wholesaler, like if I'm and I'm telling that wholesaler, hey, can you ask the seller if they'd be open to this? And so you can just use the purchase and sell agreement from the wholesaler. If you're using the realtor, you can use the realtor's purchase and sell agreement. But if you're going directly to the seller yourself, you want to make sure you talk with a title attorney, like if you're a title company state, because it just depends on your state. It may be a title company, maybe a title attorney. But you just send the terms over, and the attorney themselves, they can draft their agreement for you, and they can actually draft the promissory note. Or it is, similar to like we have a mortgage, your mortgage company, you technically have signed a promissory note whenever you bought like a regular mortgage. It's the same thing. The title company or title attorney will charge you a little bit more in your closing costs because they'll charge you the cost of them drafting that actual promissory note, but they will draft that. And then there will be a deed of trust that is recorded in your local municipality that you are purchasing this property, in installments. And these are the terms, and this is the date, this is the expected payoff. It will have all that there.
And so that's just good to know, and good to, I mean, so should people be shopping for their own title company, title attorney? Should you,
Yes, that's
put that on your list of people that I
yes, that's
need to know
very
or vet?
yes, very good question. Very good question. So one, don't feel like you have to have all this stuff in place before you purchase your property. So let me just say that anybody who follows me knows I posted about analysis paralysis like recently. Um, but so don't feel like you have to have all of these things in place to get started. But if you can, yeah, it would be nice to interact with title companies, and in particular, especially if you are interested in creative deals and creative financing like me with seller financing, and even more kind of higher level things like subject to, you definitely want to make sure that you're interacting with a title company who deals with investors and investors who do creative financing, because all title companies are not created equal. A lot of them, for the most part, deal with just regular home buyers who are buying properties off the multiple listing service that are pretty and shiny, and a lot of them were just built. Um, you want to be working with a title company that's dealing with investors who are purchasing property that has the title has changed 10, 12 times in the last 30 years because it's a run down investment property, or you're dealing with someone who knows how to actually, like I said, draft these seller financing agreements or the actual promissory note. You want to deal with a title company who deals more so with investors and creative buyers.
And this is a really good one. And I think this is important because this is a part that people miss. Of course, there's risk in everything, but you want to mitigate risk as much as possible. So we have, would it be best to create an LLC or equivalent for investing, or how to protect those kind of personal liabilities as well?
Yeah. So, yeah. So you want to have a LLC, or at least enough umbrella coverage that you're protected. But in some instances, you're going to have an LLC. For instance, with a hard money lender, a lot of them will not even let you close on a purchase in your personal name. So if you're using hard money. So in those instances, you will have to purchase an entity, whether it's an LLC or a trust or something like that. But yeah, you definitely want to kind of separate yourself. It's all about what you control, not necessarily what your name is on.
And so we talked a couple, different ways. So there's the hard money lenders, there is seller financing. What is the typical term? So hard money lending, we're used to a mortgage that is 15, 20, 30
Mhm,
years.
mhm,
Um, you aren't getting a hard money loan for 30 years. Are sellers financing for 30 years? Like, what is a typical term that
yeah.
people should be thinking of so they aren't shocked when someone says, yeah, this is good for 2 years? Then you have to figure it
So
out.
it depends on who you're purchasing from. If you're purchasing from an investor themselves, they're going to be a little bit more savvy, and they're probably going to say, let's, yeah, I'm happy to carry, the loan for you. But they're probably going to want you to refinance or sell, or some kind of way to get their money, the final payoff, that balance that's left over, back to them. They're usually probably going to want that in 5 years or less. Sometimes they'll push for 2 to 3 years. But if you're going directly to a seller that's not an investor, they're just a regular person who may be tired of their property, or it's a little run down and they just don't feel like dealing with it anymore. Maybe they're elderly, or maybe they just got a divorce and now they only have one income paying for that property, whatever it is. um, if you're talking directly to them, then it's whatever you want. In my viewpoint, a subtype of seller financing is this subject to strategy that I mentioned, where you're buying a property subject to existing mortgage. And so in that case, I have, one of my subject to deals, that's literally still a 30-year. Like, I've been paying that one at least like 5 years now, or no, 4 years now. And still going strong. And with subject to, I call it a type of seller financing. There's going to be some people who are experienced investors who disagree with me and they don't consider it seller financing. But it's a purchase strategy where you're purchasing a property subject to the existing mortgage. So the mortgage actually stays in that seller's name, but the deed, you actually go to closing. Is the legal process, because a lot of people will try to say that it's not legal. It's a legal process. You go with a title company, a title attorney, and you close, and now that property is in your name or your entity's name. But that loan stays in the original seller's name. So you own the property, but you don't own the debt. And in those situations, sometimes you'll tell that seller, hey, I promise that, your mortgage in your name will be paid off in 24 months or 36 months. But in my strategy, in general, I just tell them, I will promise to make monthly on-time payments on this mortgage until the end of the mortgage. And sometimes it could be 20 years left. It could be 30 years left on that mortgage. They may have just bought it, a few months ago. So there's a lot of flexibility.
Now, in those terms, so you're taking over someone's mortgage is $500. Are you paying them $500? Are you paying them $7 and you're sending the mortgage company $5 and you give them $2? Like, what does that
Nope.
what does
Nope,
that look like? Like, how
because
do
it's
they?
now, yeah, that's a good question. So no, it's now your property. So you're not paying them anything. So you're paying directly to their mortgage company. They're saying, like, whatever, when you met that person or that seller, you first interacted with them and they say they want to get rid of the property, and they're saying, well, my current mortgage, let's just say, is $875. You promise to pay $875 to that mortgage company every month on time until that life of the loan, or until the agreed upon time that you will pay it off. If you agree to tell the seller, hey, I promise within 36 months that I will refinance out or sell the property to pay off that mortgage, with that subject to strategy. And as some people already know, some of y'all are gonna like, well, who in the world, if I'm not getting anything out of it, who in the world would sell their property this way? So the reason why someone would sell their property subject to the existing mortgage, and now they still have that debt in their name, but they don't own the property anymore. The reason why they would do that is they have no equity in the deal, or they have no equity in their home, or if maybe they're underwater, they have negative equity. So for example, I gave the example earlier of divorce. Let's say you ran across a young man who maybe he's even military. And so with military VA loans, they can get 100% financing. They don't have to put a down payment, right? So he just purchased a property a year ago, purchased it for, let's say $250,000, and he owes $248,000 on it. So he cannot go, like, now, let's say he's divorced and now it's one income. He can't go and put that property on the open market on the MLS and sell it without having to take a loss, right? But let's say that property brings in, like, if you rented it out, it would bring in, let's say 250. Let's say his mortgage is, $1,600 for a $250,000 property. Let's say it's $1,600, but it's in an area where you can rent that property out for, $2,000, $2,200. So although it has no equity, it has cash flow. So cash flow meaning that the amount that you can get in from rent, subtract that amount of that mortgage, there's still room in that deal, that room there, that's called cash flow. And so that person may not have equity, but they're not an investor. All they're thinking about is, dang, I can't go and sell this property on the open market. I literally am underwater, or I have no equity. I'm stuck. So they'll sell it. They'll agree to whatever, to get out of that. You, as a savvy investor who's worked with Capital Dynasty, that property has cash flow potential. So you would go and potentially do a subject to deal and say, hey, well, Mr. Seller, I can actually help you. And let's say they were already behind maybe 2 or 3 payments, because now they have that one income coming in instead of 2. And so they're like, thank God you can pay this for me. So now you're building up their credit for them where their credit was dropping, and you're getting a property. They're getting rid of a headache. And you're a stand-up person. Now, if you're an unethical person, this can be really bad for that seller, but hopefully none of you people are unethical out there.
Now, would they, because that would be a question too, because I think if someone was like, I'm gonna pay your mortgage, I would be like, what's your credit? Like, what are there things that you need to provide to them to say, trust me, I got it? My
Yeah,
credit is good, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's up to the seller. Most of the times in that situation, they're not going to ask you a huge amount of questions. But what you can do is just, you can just say, if we can agree and we can put this in our agreement that if for some reason that I cannot pay you, get your property back. And, like that can actually be a document, in the agreement that they can take the property back. So that can give them a little bit of, kind of just exhale with any potential worries. But I've never had a subject to seller ask me for my credit report or anything like that.
Yeah, I'd be like, I don't know. But then again, I'm not
I've had
necessarily.
one seller financing. I've had one seller financing seller ask me for my credit report, and I just shared it with him.
That's good. I mean, but it's good to know. And I think those are always good things to know because you might be like, hold on, that's a scam. But in reality,
Mhm.
it might just be someone who's like, wait a minute, I need to make sure
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But there's so many ways to get creative out here, and that's just, I mean, we are only, kind of got the tip of the iceberg just with talking about financing. There's a lot of people are afraid to get into investing because they're like, I don't want to deal with tenants and toilets. But not even just from a financing standpoint, from a landlording standpoint, there's ways to get creative. I rent out to travel nurses. You can do grad students. You can
Now,
do
what are
med.
travel nurses? Tell people who
Oh
may not
yeah,
be in the life.
okay, yeah. So with travel nurses, they are actually travel professionals, really, because nurses are kind of like the most popular. But there's travel doctors, there's travel, a lot of different professionals. But with travel nurses, they travel around to different hospitals or healthcare centers throughout the country, and they typically have a stipend that they get for traveling, and so they have a stipend for their living expenses. And what you can do is market directly to them, and you're going to actually market them at a higher than market rent. So let's say your typical rent in your area for a 2-bedroom, 1 bath is $1,200. So travel nurse, you may market it at least 1,500. Probably even more, because the thing with travel nurse rentals is you're going to have to furnish them and you're going to have to provide the utilities. So you're going to have to, account for that. But that's just one, way that, hey, you can mitigate that potential anxiety of having to deal, with a tenant. When you're dealing with travel professionals, you have a little bit less headache, and you're dealing with a more sophisticated renter, right? Someone who's more like you. There's med students, there's graduate students, there's getting partnerships with insurance companies, where insurance companies, if someone, their house burns down or whatever the issue is, and they have to temporarily put someone into a place, you can partner with insurance companies for your rental to be like that. And you are actually going to get guaranteed money. You don't have to worry about a tenant who's not going to pay you. So again, these are just more creative ways. Location rentals. We had a great episode of Money Mondays where we talked about location rentals, where you're renting out your home for video shoots and things like that. So there's so many creative ways out there. That's not even Airbnb is like a very popular thing right now, but all the things I just mentioned, those are not even Airbnb, but you can do that as well. That's an option too.
And one thing, especially, I know we've talked before about like the travel nurses. Right
Mhm.
now, I don't know where you are, but in most large cities, there is some type of Airbnb regulation. They are
Mhm.
saying you can only have one, two, you can only rent
Mhm.
them for 30 days, 60 days, what have you. What is the difference between a travel nurse type rental versus an Airbnb?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So with the Airbnb, it's going to be ultra short term. With travel nurses, well, I shouldn't say ultra short term. It's going to be short term. Ultra short term would be more like a location rental where somebody's going to come and just use your property for a few hours. Airbnb would be short term, where they may be staying a day or a few days. And then with travel nurses, is under the umbrella term of short term rental, but technically it's what we would call a midterm rental in the real estate world, because they're typically staying from 1 month to 3 months. And if you have properties like mine, if for some reason my travel nurses, they're like, oh, can I extend for another 2 months, or can I extend? I've had actually my one that moved out earlier this month. I actually had a new tenant move back in today before I got on this call. But that particular property, that one travel nurse left, and then followed back later, was like, hey, can I move back in? I'm coming back to Baltimore. I'm like, sure you can. So it's usually at minimum 1 to 3 months, but sometimes it can be a little bit longer. Me personally, I don't like to do anything less than 2 months.
And so it's definitely a great workaround for what we're seeing in the Airbnb world, because typically those are saying if you're renting by the night, if you're renting through those kind of short term type things. And it's a great workaround. So you get a little more security than having to turn it. You got to find somebody to clean it and all those kind of things. More than likely, they're not having parties, all
Mhm.
those kind of things. So definitely just kind of a different type tenant. So that's another way. Once you get, whether it's a wholesaler or a seller financing, and you get that, you put all that stuff in place, and you're like, okay, now who's going to pay this
Yeah.
bill? That's a
Absolutely.
great
That's
way.
your exit strategy. Yeah. We like to call that exit strategy. So, what is going to be your exit strategy once you finance the property? Like you said, you financed it. You use a creative strategy to finance it, like seller financing or subject to or private money. Um, and then now you have the property. Maybe you've renovated it, and now you're like, okay, what do I do with it? And that's called an exit strategy. So either you can sell it, which I don't do that because that's not how you create long-term wealth by selling. But you can sell it, or you can actually rent it out, and you can rent it out to a traditional, like what we call cash tenant, that's going to move in and say, they're going to be on a year lease or 2-year lease, whatever. I don't think it's smart to do anything less more than 6 months in this COVID time, but that's a whole nother topic of discussion. But you can do a cash tenant, you can do a Airbnb tenant, you can do a short-term or midterm rental, you can do a location rental. Just get creative. Just don't think that landlording is all about just dealing with headache tenants. I've and I don't know where I saw this. I think maybe one of my sister docs and REI in my private Facebook group. I think it was one of them who said that they made money literally just letting students come and use each room as a storage area. They turned their house into a storage facility.
Oh, wow. Especially like during summer break or whatever, they move, and either you pay, whatever storage facility, or
Mhm.
somebody throw it in
Yeah,
some
so
room that you
yeah, you
probably
can
storing
you
some
can put
workout equipment.
you can put the same smart locks that you have on a house, or the doors in your home that you're house hacking. And I don't know, hopefully you guys know what house hacking is, because I didn't really go into that. But the same type of way you would put smart locks on each individual bedroom door for a house hack. It's the same smart locks you can use to put on each individual door and let people come and store their stuff. They have their own code. They can go in there, put the code in, and put their stuff in, take it out. That's another way to make money. It's get creative. I'm all about getting creative.
I love it because it's always things that, like, never heard. You're like, okay. Someone said you mentioned getting education. What are some of the resources that you recommend or that you use? Was it in-person classes, some self-paced online workshops? What are some of those resources that you use?
Yeah, I took a course that was it was like 10 weeks long when I first started investing, of investors who had been investing for I think they had been investing for at least 5-10 years, um, or at least, yeah, let's say 5 years. But I think definitely working with someone in person is helpful if you're a hands-on learner like me. But also getting mentorship, whether it's finding an investor in your area and just going and watching them, like going to their different sites, working with a real estate consultant like me. And although I've kind of steered away a little bit from doing the consulting calls because they're kind of disjointed. I'm kind of more so focusing on VIP clients, like hand holding. But I think also books and podcasts. Podcasts are kind of my favorite way. One of my favorite podcasts is the Millionaire Podcast. There's the Rants and Gems Real Estate Podcast. And these are just Black podcasts as well, that I'm naming that I really like. Um, uh, there's Bigger Pockets. They're not a Black podcast, but they have a lot of resources. They actually have a lot of books as well. They have ebooks as well when it comes to out of state investing, um, property management, landlording. They have different books. Um, and then just really hearing people's stories. That's why I really like podcasts, because you can hear investors come on and tell their story of actually the different steps they took to get started.
And then someone says, what is your Facebook group again?
So I have a Facebook group called Sister Docs and REI. So that group has Black female doctors, dentists, pharmacists, podiatrists, vets, just Black female doctors that invest in real estate. And then my other social media is Capital Dynasty on IG, at Capital Dynasty. And so that's where I just, post my shenanigans, and sometimes I'll post my before and afters and, different things that I'm doing in real estate.
Then there's another question that said, house hacking is essentially renting out individual rooms in a property. Once again, head on over to the YouTube page, go under real estate, and we actually had a 2-part series to talk about how to finance, and I even share it because I am a house hacker. And it doesn't have to be your
house
own
hack right now.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be in your home per se. So you can house hack without them like sharing your bathroom and your kitchen and stuff too. So head on over there.
I don't like to share. Yeah, I didn't really jump into that. Whoever answered that question or asked that question, because like you said, you had already kind of like had series on that. But yeah, no, like you said, it doesn't have to be like sharing rooms. Like you can buy, I mentioned earlier, you can buy a multi-unit property. You can buy a property that is 2 units, 3 units, 4 units. And you can do that with an owner-occupant, no down payment or low down payment loan. So please know that you can buy 4-unit building and only have to put 3.5% down, or 3%, or sometimes 0%. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, with somebody
100% is like you'll never pay a mortgage payment. Like it's very likely that you get somebody else and you just in there hanging out.
Yeah. So that's a good way to actually get started in real estate investing for your first property. A lot of people don't want to like live in an apartment life, because when you buy a 4-unit building, your unit that you're living in is kind of similar to an apartment sometimes. And some people just like, I don't want to live in that. But really and truly, so you don't commit mortgage fraud, you because that is a thing, mortgage fraud, you can buy that property and only really have to live in it for a year before you can refinance out into a non-owner occupant loan. And then now you can move out and buy your dream home, because now you have a 4-unit building that you only purchased with 3.5% down. And now you have 4 sets of rent coming to you that should, if you purchase right, you make your money on your purchase. So it's all about purchasing right. If you purchase right, all of that rental income should significantly surpass the cost of the mortgage that you're paying. So that's a good way to get started too. I didn't really go into that a lot because I knew that this was already covered. But please do know, and let me just double click that you also can renovate your property with that purchase. You can do a purchase and renovation loan and buy that property. It may be a rundown property that may cost $100,000, 4-unit building for $100,000. It may need another $100,000 worth of work. And you may say, where in the world am I going to get $100,000? You literally can now have a mortgage that is $200,000 and only have to put 3% down, 3.5% down of that
$6,000. Like
of that
I got to quantify, like
yes,
$6,000. Now you
plan. Yes, exactly. And buy that property and have the renovation wrapped into one loan. And now that's your new mortgage. So you don't have to figure out where I'm going to get $100,000 from.
And one of the great things, especially, so one thing, if you stay in it for 2 years, that's usually what the bank wants to see in order to count it as income. So all of a sudden, now you make way more, because the bank is like, oh, wait, look, you got 2 years of rental history too. So even if you like, I don't know if I want to stay in an apartment, if you can suck it up, it can be a big return. So you know what?
And how fast does 2 years go by? We've seen it in the last 2 years. How fast did these last 2 years?
Exactly. Our pre-pandemic life
that we're in. Yeah, how fast? Right.
So that could be really good stuff. We talked about a whole bunch of stuff. I hope I got through all the questions. A couple of y'all questions are over on the YouTube page. So make sure y'all head over there, hit the subscribe button, and check on the real estate tab, because this is going to be in the real estate tab too. So you can go through all the house hacking and learning to be a realtor. And then, of course, this unconventional financing. So you ain't got to come out of pocket. You got to pull all your money from, you got to ask your mom for money and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there are literally so many options out there. Just to give an example, because I think I glossed over that before when you mentioned like what can one of these look like. For example, I have a one I creatively purchased it and I creatively landlorded. So I have a travel nurse rental, so I rent it out to travel nurses. So creative landlording, and I purchased it from a person with seller financing. That person was an investor themselves, but they were aging out of their portfolio and also, unfortunately, had recently been ill. And so they just wanted to kind of move away from the city, move down to sunny Florida. And they were trying to sell out their portfolio. So I happened to run across them through a wholesaler who emailed me. It just popped up in my inbox basket because I let people know what I'm looking for. And that seller, we ultimately came to the agreement that this is a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath property. It's a small property, but it had several rooms, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bath. And I paid that investor $5,000 down for, I think the purchase price we ultimately agreed on, and this is Baltimore, so don't, for you guys who live in California, the purchase price I think was $105 or $115. So I put $5,000 down. It needed about $25,000 worth of work. I put $5,000 down, and the way we set it up is I am paying interest, 5% interest, which is amortized over 30 years with a 3-year term with an option to renew in 3 years. So that is an example of terms that you may see that a savvier seller may ask for. And $5,000 down for a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath property. And so my mortgage with that is $566, and I rent it out for $2,000 a month.
What?
No bank.
No bank, no collection of documents, no folder, no, let me see every dime you've ever spent over the past 5 years, none of that. And $1,500
Yeah,
in
and I
net
just
revenue.
use a 0% down or 0% APR business credit card to do my, small rehab.
Huge. And hopefully you got some points. And if y'all don't know about the points game, hop over to the YouTube page.
Yeah, I saw that episode.
Ronnie talked about that. So hop over there, get that. Sierra says she can't even get a box in Cali for $100,000. We sell a
that's why I just I knew that you guys were like, wait a minute.
You can get you a shiny parking spot in the District of Columbia.
This is Be More, baby, and this is why I invest here. So find a good market. You can invest where you rest, or you can invest where it's the best. where it's a good market.
So definitely, regardless of how or where you want to invest, once again, you can go to capitaldynasty.com, go to resources, get you a free call, free, FREE, and then get you a little more time and pay for that. Invest in yourself. Somebody said this is a great. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Make sure y'all head over to subscribe over on the YouTube page. We are just a few subscribers away from my next threshold. So go ahead.
Oh, nice.
Head on over there. I'm trying to hit the 500 mark. So head on over there and hit that subscribe button. But as we close out, any closing remarks, thoughts? I mean, one of the bigger things is make sure you go follow her again on Instagram, because great tips. She's showing us over there shopping at the Goodwill. I love a little Goodwill shopping outing.
I get creative with everything: creative financing, creative landlording, and creative furnishing. That's a whole nother topic. I can furnish a rental property with $3,000 or less.
I love it. See, so tell us, like, if we're on the fence, like, what should we do next? What is the first thing we are going to lock off here and do something? What are we going to do?
So get educated and get started. So get educated. One, listen to podcasts. Take a course if you have to, get with, a paid mentor if you have to, work with a real estate consultant or mentor, i.e. Capital Dynasty, and, get educated, and then get started. Don't fall into the trap of analysis paralysis. Give yourself a set time. Say, I'm going to devote, 3 months to, just learning as much information as possible. Or, I'm going to devote 6 months to this program or whatever it is, and then go ahead and get started, because you will always feel a little bit uncomfortable. Your gains, your success in real estate is outside of that comfort zone. So you'll never feel like you know everything. So just go ahead and get started, get educated, get started, look off market, and you make your money on your purchase.
I love it. If y'all were like, I ain't gonna ever be able to afford nothing before, I hope you leave here today saying, you know what? One, quit ignoring and cussing out them people that's calling to buy your home. I'm taking that advice myself. I'm gonna stop cussing those people out. And then use that as a resource for your next deal. And look up some of these terms. We went through a few different things, and get familiar, get comfortable, and figure out what's going to be a thing. And as always, if you take advantage of any of these tips, if you take advantage of any of these insights, let us know. We want to celebrate with you. And so I hope that you come back here and join us next Monday for another Great Money Monday. Thank you so much, Dr. Cooper. My love, Daa'iyah. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I love you all and can't wait to see you next week. Have a wonderful night.